Hi, I'm Rory Greeno of XR Today, and welcome to the October recording of the Big XR News Show. Today I'm joined by Jay Latter, Jennifer Rogers, Leticia Bashard, Amy Peck, and Kevin O'Donovan. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you're having a nice, busy time in the XR market. This month, alongside the previous, this entire year has been very busy. There's been a lot of shifts in the market. And we're using today to really speak about where the big names are heading into the new year and into the second half of the decade. And let's start off with Microsoft. One of the more interesting things that happened in the past few weeks is Microsoft potentially, or it seems a little bit more solid as the weeks go on since the news, but potentially leaving the headset race with Microsoft HoloLens 2 reaching a discontinuation state, or at least a last time to buy status. What I'm finding quite interesting with this is the idea of Microsoft being one of the sort of big names earlier on in the sort of mainstream headset development with the HoloLens, leaving and perhaps becoming more of a software provider. Um, to kick us off, why don't we start with Kevin? It's really great to see your face on the show again. And I want to just hear your perspective on what you think about the last time to buy state for HoloLens 2, perhaps what the future holds for Microsoft in the next few months, or excuse me, next few years even. Do you think they're moving away from heads or moving away from hardware, going into immersive software providing for enterprise? They've still got a lot going on. So what's your thoughts about the HoloLens 2 going into a potentially discontinuation?
Well, I suppose I'd hate to be a HoloLens 2 sales guy right now. That'd be a tough job, right? Unless you're discounting. Um, so based on the news that we've seen, it looks like that HoloLens 2 is whatever, end of lifing. So they'll have support until what, 2027 or whatever. But to be honest, that just means if I'm using it today, I've got a runway to get off it. But I can't see anybody investing in. Um, Again, reading what's in the press, Microsoft seem to be going through, as they do every couple of years, re-looking at their strategies. Are we doing hardware? Are we doing software? Where's the money? What do we do? Whatever. Um, the HoloLens came out in what, 2016? And back in that day, it was pretty cool, right? I personally found it a little awkward to use, but in terms of just the technology and the mixed reality and whatever, like 8, 9 years ago, it was pretty bleeding edge at the time. And I think they've probably learned an awful lot in terms of the software ecosystem and I think we cover it as well later on. In that I do think there's going to be a big shake up in the headset market. Depends what you mean by the headset. The mixed reality, wearable spectacles, I know contact lenses in the future, or the big things we have today. Um, I think that because Microsoft and others got back in, or let's say kicked this off, whatever, 10 years ago, I think that's where a lot of the lens technology that we're getting today, and that's becoming commodity. So then other people will use the same technology and build their headsets, and mine will be slightly different to yours because I do this and you'll do that and whatever. So I think the headset business is still maturing. And then, it's a teenager, or maybe I don't know, maybe a 12-year-old. We still have a long way to go, but yeah, certainly Microsoft. But like their biggest partner was the U.S. military, I believe, for the IVAS system. That's continuing. Again, reading the press, Microsoft are going to be a key part of it because they provide all the cloud and the software. But there seems to be other players coming in with the hardware. So, but yeah, HoloLens, as we know it, I think is probably retiring. But who knows what's going on behind Microsoft closed door? Maybe there'll be a HoloLens 3 or something else pop up out of the blue, but we'll see.
The thing is, the IVAS is as well discontinued. They are focusing, of course, on the military backend, on the military cloud, all of this stuff. But the militaries across, or every partner within the NATO, and of course, as a forerunner of the US military, is looking for other partners concerning the hardware. I mean, the fun thing is with Microsoft and hardware, whenever they touched hardware, it was really good. It was great, far better than their software. You can see quite a strong signal completely leaving HoloLens, because it was even removed from Windows 11. So the drivers, all of this stuff is simply disappeared. So I'm expecting that the technology that they have used is not the thing that you can make business with. It's too fragile. This whole shield and so on. I've seen really bad accidents where people then were cut in the face and so on. So my guess here is they might stay in the hardware business as well, because you can make money there. They just will follow up with a new technology. When you see the competitors, when you see the Snap Spectacles, when you see what Meta came along with, that they might focus on something that will look a little bit sexier, will look a little bit easier than this flying fly thing. In general, while they removed, for example, MR or mixed reality from the Windows drivers, it's also some kind of signal that we will start talking about different areas, which means what we have currently, if it's the Snap stuff, if it's the Meta stuff, it's not AR. It's mixed reality. Just the whole marketing was bullshitting about AR. The classic AR is the head-up display in your F-16 jet. So right now, by eliminating mixed reality from the whole wording, I guess that they go through this marketing rebranding nonsense to call everything else just augmented reality or virtual reality. That this segment of naming it really mixed reality, which it was, is not really being used. It's not sexy. The people don't know what is mixed reality. So this is one thing, simply to close a domain, to completely abandon it, leave it, and to position themselves as competitor to the others who make it a little bit sexier.
Something else I just wanted to throw out there as well, Leticia, I'll let you go next, but just something I wanted to throw out there for the conversation as well is Microsoft moving towards providing software. They're obviously out there with Microsoft Mesh that they released earlier in the year, Teams integrations with certain immersive features as well. And then obviously we've already talked about the back ends with areas like the military that has been established too. Leticia, please go on to your thoughts, but I'll be also interested to hear your thoughts about Microsoft's position in terms of immersive software providing.
Well, in Europe, I would say that mixed reality got its foot in the door with Microsoft's HoloLens, and especially for remote assistance. And I know that different big travel, rail or airlines, they have introduced remote assistance via HoloLenses. So now I guess, and I'm fully with you, Jay, I think that it's going to shift into something different, because the new MR glasses or the Snapchat and newcomers of this world, they don't look, like a safety. Like it won't work for people working in tunnels and on roads and in manufacturing plants and facilities. So it is not going to have the same use cases, and that's what worries me a bit, because this is where it was picking up, especially in the architecture, engineering, construction field as well.
I think Kevin's right. First of all, it was groundbreaking when it came out. I think it started to shift our understanding of what the capabilities of AR versus this idea of mixed reality, of really having like a contextual, spatially anchored, location aware layer of data in our field of view. And we're still just fighting the hardware, right? And the ability to be able to shrink the compute and be able to have this small device. So we've always had companies that are trying to cram, as much as they possibly can, and then get it as small as possible. And then you have the flip side, like Focals by North, which was acquired by Google, where the, and Ray-Ban, the Meta Ray-Bans, where they start with the smallest actual wearable form factor, and then they put as much in as they can while maintaining that form factor. And we still have a chasm between the two. The thing that's really smart that Microsoft is doing is integrating Microsoft Mesh into Teams. It's just like anything. You have to go where people are, and people are in Teams. And so it makes sense for them to start to understand how would people actually use now this sort of next layer of kind of 3D assets and actually leveraging spatial awareness in these collaborative environments. And we haven't answered that question, which is, I think, a very interesting conundrum, that this technology has been out for a long time, and people don't want to collaborate in these virtual environments regularly unless they have a really specific purpose, like design, for example. Now you're back. Design is a great use case, especially, car manufacturing, where you've got designers all over the world. They can work with the actual 3D assets together remotely, but we're still not quite there yet. Google, looks like they're going to be making much more of a software play. It looks like Samsung probably, if there is such a thing as sort of a HoloLens 3, Samsung is going to be building it, leveraging technology from Microsoft, probably Google as well, and maybe some of the Focals by North, maybe even Magic Leap, right? Because Magic Leap has the best optics in the game for mixed reality, right? And they're going to now start hopefully making that much more broadly available. They've been making some noises about that. So all in all, I think it's just, we are all living 10 years from now knowing what the capability is and could be, but consumers just don't care because it's not in a wearable form factor. Like if they looked like Leticia's glasses, everyone would be using them, but they don't.
That's the thing, that different use cases, and right now, because as well of the price, that you need a backend, that you need authentication, these use cases are currently very handpicked, and they are not really compatible to each other. So if we are talking about the military, if you want to use this in the field, you need something that is more modular, where you can attach, let's say, a thermal vision onto it, where it can display you from the rifle scope and so on. While when Leticia is in the tunnel somewhere in the Swiss Alps, she needs something slightly different. So here, it's, of course, if it would look like her glasses that you can wear under a face shield in a biolab, or if you, yeah, exactly. So either we accept that we as consumers, we as users, that we will need multiple devices tailored to these use cases, or someone comes around with a really cool small thingy that looks not like Leticia's but maybe like mine's, where I have everything and I can still wear it under my shield, under the helmet, under the sunglasses, and so on. So these two ways, so how you've described, Amy, one start with the smallest factor and then add in different technologies, while others go with the full picture and of course struggle with the right use cases.
Yeah, and I think I've asked, it makes sense for the military to look at a broader swath of hardware. I don't think that necessarily Microsoft will not be part of that solution. I think they have been so instrumental in this whole program. And however they end up playing, maybe it's a combination of older hardware, newer hardware, and some of their platforms and cloud services. But we have to start looking at, like, to your point, Jay, it's like, what are the use cases? And it's not just a modular headset. Like if it's in the field, it has to be incredibly ruggedized. Like it is just too lightweight, which is good, but it's not going to last in the field on soldiers. So it's like, what do soldiers need when? HoloLens is still great at the thing that we all love, which is the remote assist. It's great for training. So, I think we'll start to see these hybrid use cases starting in more controlled environment with maybe one type of headset, and moving into more challenging environment using lighter and lighter weight optics that are much more purpose built with limited functionality but valuable. And hopefully hiding some of the light spectrum so that you can't see it, right? So it's great for them to have their infrared lighting, but they also have to be able to make sure that there is no glow, no light leaks whatsoever. So there's just lots of challenges with this technology.
Yeah, I'll just echo off of, some of the points that others have made. And, Amy was just mentioning, and I think a lot of us have been mentioning the defense use case. But once again, coming from heavy industrial, I will say, yes, HoloLens brought a lot of things to the table. But I'll say what I've said about form factor over and over again in environments where colleagues are, even in remote operation support, where colleagues are outside in uncontrolled environments, whereby situational awareness and field of vision, particularly peripheral vision, is critical. We've not really been able to use HoloLens, right? Just everything about the form factor really doesn't work when you actually, ironically, are in complex, challenging environments in the real world, in which remote operation support probably makes the most sense from a use case scenario, because the environment is unpredictable and you need a colleague on the other end that can see what you see and give you the best advice. Unfortunately, the form factor never really worked super well for that particular environment, which not only, applies to a defense scenario, but also heavy industrial, energy, all of those spaces. Or we're talking about physical infrastructure and assets that are outside primarily. I think one of the things that Microsoft did do very early on, though, and everyone has said this, is noticed that as many of us that were in the space were working on trying to address the actual use cases that we had, whereby the form factor just didn't work, we were bringing in all of these other types of emerging hardware and form factor to try to solve for that problem. And the one thing that we still had to do was deal with the digital infrastructure, which almost inevitably meant connection into Skype at the time, or Teams later, or the ways in which, and even that remote operation support perspective, how we were connecting to people in different parts of the world simultaneously to see the same thing. And I think Microsoft figured that out, right? When you look at the large organizations and enterprises, most of them have a heavy, heavy commitment to Microsoft infrastructure. And, that's the way in which you can utilize what these enterprises have and capitalize upon that to provide the experience or the use case that they're after. So I agree with everyone. I think that Microsoft is very well positioned in this space without the hardware component. And it'll be interesting to see, as we continue to iterate around the form factor and what happens there, whether they decide to enter back into that space or partner around that space as it continues to mature. But right now, from a back-end infrastructure piece, which Jay was speaking about before, Microsoft is already ideally positioned. So why not lean into that, right? And provide that experience for enterprise to move to the next level.
But Jennifer, that must pain you to actually say that, because at IEEE, not only are you looking at standards, but you're looking at interoperability, which is the elephant in the room, and that it's just more kind of vendor lock-in. And so are there some ways that we can look at that cloud infrastructure and the secure cloud infrastructure and data flows that would enable companies to be able to move from an Azure to a GCP to an AWS to private networks, whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. And point well taken, right? Because as we look at interoperability and all of those pieces, it's interesting because even when you talk to the large enterprises around how they're trying to piece together the infrastructure, there usually is a Microsoft component, whether it's Azure or what have you, but there are other components as well, right, that have to be connected. And so that interoperability piece is essential. And hopefully, as we've said many times before, hopefully everyone is looking to that open architecture and how they can play a particular role in it versus trying to be the end all be all of the architecture, which just really hasn't worked and likely won't work going into the future.
But folks, I suppose we have to be realistic. Like, the headline was that Microsoft announced it's the last time to buy HoloLens 2. They did not announce that HoloLens completely is dead. They didn't say they were getting out of augmented reality. And some of the clickbait I've seen in the press that, oh, augmented reality is dead, it's all mixed reality, back to Jay's point. Like and to be quite honest, the industry has caused this confusion. Mixed reality, augmented reality, something else reality, spatial computing. It's like, God, no wonder people are annoyed, right? But as I say, HoloLens 2, HoloLens 2, last time to buy. No one said that they're walking away from everything. So,
well, and that's a much nicer way of saying end of life. Like last time to buy, selling out to the bare walls.
As I say, if I was a HoloLens 2 sales guy right now, I'd be probably looking at LinkedIn jobs.
It's like those like sketchy carpet stores that are in weird locations in like small town America where they're always going out of business, but they've been going out of business for decades. I feel like this is sort of a version of that.
And I think there's an interesting side note here as well with sort of mentioning these different types of these different variations of XR, AR, MR, VR devices, and then you have the spatial computing terminology that was obviously popularized by Apple this year. But then you could also say that that was brought in via HoloLens before 2020, I believe, as well. And so I think there is that idea, or at least something I'm quite interested in exploring, is the idea of these of a refinement of these definitions going into the second half of the decade, with augmented reality smart glasses becoming more of a consumer aware product, even though it's still in time towards that adoption curve. MR headsets sort of reaching that same argument. And then I think when you look at sort of the way Meta Quest 3S, and this is obviously looking from a consumer point of view, but it's about optics, how that's being pushed. It's kind of overtaking the VR headset. I think VR has been, we obviously see where things go, but I think it's almost going to get reserved, or is being seen to be reserved towards sort of training use cases and those areas where full immersive technology is highly needed, and where needing to disassociate a team member with their workplace is 100% needed. But then, I think Kevin brought up the good point earlier. One of the sort of angles on the questions for this conversation today would have been, who are the big leaders of headsets? I wrote the big three for headsets, but that could be whichever number. But what even is that definition? There's smart glasses, VR headsets, MR headsets, and then we got the software side of things too. And then we have people like Snap re-entering the market. So I think it's an interesting place to define this technology. And perhaps going into the second half of this decade, with this consumer, with these devices hitting the consumer market a little bit more, I don't know if it's anyone's point or anyone's note here is to, will this technology really start to trickle down, or not even trickle down, but trickle up, or come into the consumer space a little bit more broadly, and then will that smartphone revolution of the workplace? Would that be predictable in 2025 to 2030? Is that shift? How futuristic is that? Is that something that's more contemporary today? Obviously, we'll talk about Orion, we'll talk about some meta stuff a little bit later on, but they're pushing that device as a time machine, into a glimpse into the future. But you could argue that XR, very easily argue, obviously XR is being used today via smartphones and desktops as well. So, Kevin, I can see you've got a little bit of interest there in this discussion point. So I want to kick off with you once again, to be honest. But from that perspective, do you think the definitions of these headsets are going to become, or wearables are going to become, more clear in the coming years? I think there's the definitions between MR, what is mixed reality, what is virtual reality, what is augmented reality, and what's the difference, and where do those use cases exist? Is that something that's going to become clearer in the next few years, do you reckon? Or do you think that's going to become even more complex as more and more vendors enter and leave the market?
Probably both, because they'll all have very clever marketing people and they'll all want to put their stake in the ground. To be quite honest, like, we could probably spend the next 24 days debating what's MR, AR, VR, something R. And there's lots of papers out there explaining what it is. I think most people don't care. In the consumer world, they don't care. And what I think it's back to function and no friction and use case. And your point earlier in that we talk about headsets and then what kind of headset, the VR headset, mixed reality headset, the Orion development platform coming from Meta, blah, blah, blah. They're all different. But I think augmented reality and what I would call overlay of a digital object in the real world, that's happening an awful lot today on a smartphone. The amount of apps that have this built in now, you're not downloading an augmented reality app. You download the IKEA app and it goes, if you want to see what this couch will look like in your thing, click this button. Now, it doesn't mention augmented reality, doesn't mention mixed reality, doesn't mention whatever, but it's like, what will it look like in my living room? Oh, that's pretty cool. I'll buy that. So that kind of whatever use case, functionality, frictionless, we're seeing a lot more of that. Now, whether that's going to be in the glasses or whatever, and you know, you spoke about that, all the different types of headsets. You probably need a multi-dimensional matrix for which is the top headset in what thing, because if I go to you, what's the top headset for training fighter pilots? We can all come up with a list. If I go, what's the best headset for a remote worker climbing up a pole on an energy company? That's a different list. Still valid, just different. And if I go for consumer and I want to go play games or I want to do the IKEA catalog, total different lists. They're not wrong, but it's just that we're mixing apples and oranges and bananas and throwing in a few pears and a potato and stuff as well and going, mine's better than yours. But the definition chaos is that's not helping.
And just something to throw out there before as well, before I don't want to interrupt anyone, but there's also the regional consideration as well, which is depending where you are in the world, those vendors are going to look very different. And then obviously you've got the very specific enterprise facing ones, say your RealWear's for example. It could completely depend if you're in the EU, US, India, Africa, China, wherever that may be.
And I think I want to really quick, Jay, because something that Kevin said is that, you know, we're talking about all the different devices and all of the different names. And at the end of the day, until we're not talking about which devices we're in, and we're not talking about which reality we're in, these will never become ubiquitous. It's just we're fighting use cases and names and hardware. Like we're not making it easy for consumers. So we've got our work cut out for.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. We're way too enamored with the hardware at this point, you know, and not as focused on what Kevin's talking about, which is that transparent experience that the user isn't even aware of what the back end or the front end or anything is. It just is.
For the consumer, for the user, you are right. It becomes irrelevant if it's VR, MR, XR, tralala, whatever. The thing is, it will be more to the domain where you use it. So when Kevin mentioned fighter jets, so of course we will not give a damn about an F-16. It will be about the next generation. So in the F-35, you already have your XR device built in. It's your fucking helmet. So if you just simulate it or if you use it, does not matter. And this is one trend, for example, that I currently see where you train, these devices should be as well the same one that you can use while you work. This is one of the most beneficial things, so that you already start to, even if it would be a HoloLens, if you can wear it as a nurse, you train with it in your simulated environment, and then you simply pass your test and you are live on the patient on the bed while you get all of the graphs and so on. So this is one of the biggest things that I currently see, that the training environments should be at least similar, if not the same, like your working environments. Then you can do remotely. Then you can access it from all over. Then if you are real life there or virtually there, does not matter. It's just another overlay of informations or background of informations. So here, these use cases, these environments, multimodality, interoperability, yada, 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 this will somehow depend on the use case. Of course, military needs something different than a nurse, even if both are dealing with bloody corpses. But this discussion, the ones in the procurement do not care if they buy AR, VR, or an AR-15. It really depends on what value does it bring. And this value started to be visible right now. So when more and more of these use cases are becoming more mature, when Kevin is working on digital twins and completely explain why is it so helpful and so on, if IEEE is working on standards, and so on and so on. So this peak is, I guess, reached, that not 2025, it might be closer to 2027, something like this, when it becomes somehow part of your working environment. If you are an office worker, that you can have your 3D data in whatever device, if it's a holographic display, if it's whatever. So this started to change. Many people are working on these new work areas, and we see more and more also demand in these valuable use cases. To the point of smartphones, have you seen the recent 3 foldable from Huawei? So smartphones are becoming a completely different device type, where it's more foldable between having a call, having a tablet, so becoming mature from all of this toying and nonsense. And I might even foresee that after 2035, it might be that smartphones, that you will have just some kind of dumb terminal, and smartphone becomes a service, that you don't buy the latest device, it will be just an update. And this is as well something where during CES, for example, it was the Barcelona show, where Deutsche Telekom, not the brightest candles in the room, but they started to explain a dumb device with AI simply adapting. And this was more or less a small prediction. Sorry, guys. Small prediction of this smartphone or communication as a service.
And Jay, you're wondering why your broadband keeps breaking.
Well, no, it's like, oh, suddenly you're like gone, and your Microsoft 365 is going to shut off.
Swisscom, loving you, Swisscom. They're so far away from the game. No, what I wanted to add is I have the impression that, for instance, just like it happened with the World Economic Forum, where there was no benchmark made whatsoever about which device, which solution they would go with. It was more about the software. And it's just like in communication, you choose your environment, your software environment. And so we will follow the same trend. We will just have the software environment gearing us towards Samsung, the Android, or the iOS family. And that's it. And then you will have different types of devices and gears around those system environments. That's it. Because I was very surprised with the World Economic Forum. They had made no benchmark about their metaverse. They just picked up the Microsoft, the Horizon, because it was Microsoft and Meta. And so they thought, okay, we go safe, we go with the partnership that works and that we already run in our company, in our network. So yeah, I think it's not going to be so easy, for instance, for the Varios of this world to be agnostic and to pursue being agnostic, because you will need to find your camp. I have the impression.
Maybe all of these bespoke or niche providers like Avario, like an Ixtal, they might have use cases in closed environments, while the masses, the Metas, the Microsofts, and so on, will deliver XR as a service.
Yeah, I actually am very anti this whole, move to as a service, because, we're all going to go broke very quickly in, $9.99 a month increments. Like, it's absurd.
It's not going to work.
No, I mean, it's really like that model is horrible for consumers. So if there's some regulators out there, like, let's get in front of this problem.
They'll bundle with the entertainment. They will need to at this price. Yeah.
I mean, and now all I do is I just binge watch HBO for a year, and then I get the next, then I get Showtime. It's like,
Whereas here you will have your Disney metaverse, your HBO metaverse, and the entire environment. No, please, no.
And the people pay it. The people pay it.
what you described before, really, the construct of having your training environment be your home environment, you're describing the way that we move from having our work mobile device and our home mobile device to having a single device that we can do work and and suits our personal needs. And it goes back to this, I probably have said it on every single one of these shows, but it's the day-to-day utility. And until we have day-to-day utility with these devices in whatever format they happen to be, they're still going to be very specialized. VR is very much an environment. It's almost like, the difference between, going to your office is VR, right? So it's purpose built. You're going there for something specific, for meetings, for training, for whatever you're doing, or entertainment, to learn something, to be, entertained. Whereas, AR and sort of mixed reality, spatial computing will eventually be, what the internet was for us, except instead of us having to go in and log in somewhere and see it on a 2D screen, in theory, all of this data is going to live all around us. The other thing that we don't talk about, and I'm as big a fan of NVIDIA as anyone, but this level of compute now with AI, with all of the data that we're, and I'm a big believer also in self-sovereign data, but where's that going to live? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to manage it? And so we are jumping the shark a little bit, I think. And we're getting close to this sort of runaway train construct. And I think we just have to start, appealing to consumers in a way that's meaningful to them. Because when I have conversations, when I'm outside of the bubble of all the tech people, nobody cares. And they're not waiting for, on pins and needles for like the right device. They don't care. It's got to be sort of the iPhone moment. It's got to be the BlackBerry moment where someone presents us something that's so compelling that we put down the thing we used to use and we pick it up. And I think we need to start really thinking, what does that really look like, and not in theoretical terms. And this is where Microsoft is well positioned with, Microsoft Mesh now being embedded in Teams, Meta with, the Ray-Ban stories, like how people are interacting with that, how they're creating content. Eventually, they're going to want to create that content and anchor it in space. Also, just more data, more compute. But so the company, it's like there is a smart path forward for some of these larger tech companies. But I also think there's an opportunity for some smaller tech companies to come in with these really interesting solutions. And it certainly wasn't the humane pin. but do you have one? Please tell me you don't have one.
No, but like, me, right? I like my history. Like, we've had the BlackBerry moment. We had the Apple iPhone moment. We had the VHS video recorder moment. There was no UN or IEEE or group of people stood around and said, which is the best one, and this is going to be the winner. It was free market, and consumers spoke, right? So it wasn't that somebody decided that this is the best thing, we'll all go there. Perfect. We had, God, years ago, I'm old enough when you were going around with a mobile phone. Is that CDMA or is that a GSM, right? Who cares, right? But that was the big battle at the time. And that was US versus Europe and blah, blah, blah. But I do not believe that the industry is gonna come together somewhere in the dark room and go, well, here's the answer for the device of the future. We'll see all sorts of things, and then suddenly someone will break through and they'll sell lots of it. And like what I always say, what becomes the standard? Whoever sells the most.
I agree with you, Kevin. I agree with you, Kevin, on the hardware piece, on the form factor and everything else. But if we look at the ways in which all of this communicates with one another, we do have a background of quite a few standards that have enabled that, whether that was TCP/IP or Wi-Fi or what have you, right? So, I mean, I think this goes back to Amy's point again, whereby we're actually focused on the experience and what it is from a data perspective that we're putting in someone's field of vision in the course of their day at any given point to really help them with whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. That does require, I believe, an acknowledgement that that person is the same person, regardless of whether they're in their personal life, whether they're in their work life, regardless of where they are at any given moment and what device they're on. And that does require us to agree around the ways in which all of this works together and communicates with one another. And if we don't get that part right, I do agree with Amy that we're running a race to the end here, where we end up with a whole bunch of different ecosystems that don't work together, and in the end don't provide a user experience that's relevant or meaningful.
And laser discs, because it goes in the pile with the laser discs and the Betamax.
But it's like having a dual SIM, actually, what you're saying. This is the breakthrough of dual SIM a few years ago, and now it would be the same on a device.
Oh, we're so far from dual SIM. We just need somebody to care. Like consumers have spoken. Actually, they've said nothing. They've said, we don't care. Like this is not interesting to them in any way, shape, or form. Yes, Quest 2, Quest 3 has really brought more consumers in, but it's still largely gaming and entertainment.
And Microsoft has the gaming power and has the gaming data already. So that's been always overlooked, but they have the community.
But will they be allowed to merge this data?
Unfair advantage, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, Amy mentioned data already, right? I mean, there's the concept of ownership. I will say, particularly, I know Kevin and I work in similar spaces from time to time, but I was sitting with a large group of energy companies a few weeks back talking about how do we create an ecosystem, acknowledging that we have we have a value chain that consists of different parts of the ecosystem and different companies that have to work together. How do we negotiate ownership of data and what that looks like? And how do we deal with that in a complex environment whereby we have different vendors that are part of these solutions as well? And who is owning the data and who's trying to commoditize the data and for what purpose and all of those kinds of things. I mean, that's definitely a piece that we have not worked out.
Well, and Kevin invited me and led an amazing panel a few weeks back on how do we actually share data for the greater good, and how do we stop being so locked down, and if we can start to kind of think about, all right, what would be layers of data that we could strip of any kind of IP, any kind of corporate secrets, and really make it available. And one of the people on our panel had identified cybersecurity as one avenue to do that, right? Because that is everybody's enemy, right? It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a consumer or someone's at the door. That is my phone ringing. I'm going to pretend I don't hear it. I've only been here for 3 hours. Who's calling me? There's so much that has to happen. And Jennifer, that's why I always am so happy that you're out there fighting the good fight. Whereas, Kevin and I are just talking about it, but we're not actually trying to build the standards. We're going to let you do that. You're welcome, because we're givers.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, I always talk about the ways in which we can actually maximize value for everyone, because I particularly as we're talking about data for the greater good and what have you, if we can all kind of connect to what it is we're trying to cause or create and the ways in which we all can maximize our value, I think we're in a winning space. Now, the interesting thing about that is that requires a tremendous amount of creativity to get to that point where we come to
and regulation, sadly.
Well, we either create the standards and agree upon them, or we get into regulation, right? I think those are the pieces that we all need to negotiate together and understand how we want to move forward. Do we want to create and agree upon standards, or do we want to rely on an external party to regulate them for us?
And then you have issues with cultural, with national stuff. You guys in the US have a completely different expectation on data, on greater good and so on than I have in Germany, than Kevin has in his luxury villa in southern France, or than Leticia has somewhere in the mountains in Switzerland. So of course, or here, Rory, of course, UK. It's somehow this thing between the chairs. So you have always these issues. What kind of national chauvinism will be the stronger? So what you might somehow invent or define as a standard might not be accepted by the European Union because not invented here. So again, something, if you really want to have some kind of breakthrough, it needs to be easy, it needs to be logical, it needs to be transparent. I always want to know, Key Bono, what do you have from my data? Somehow this kind of voluntarily giving you my data just because you've convinced me it's good and I don't care what kind of regulation is applying. I think this is the thing where everyone from the meta level, not Facebook meta, but the real meta level, needs to be aligned and have the same understanding. But we drifted a little bit away in the topics, right?
Well, we said at the top of the show before we started recording that it was very likely we were going to go fully off the reservation. And oh, look, here we are.
I think it's always important though to touch on these data topics really because they're the key to these this sort of smartphone moment that we're kind of discussing there in the background as well. Once these align and once that framework's there, it's going to be easy to roll out, whether it be software or hardware. Surely that's the way to link it all back there. And we're talking earlier, and we've only got 10 more minutes, so it'll be good to get.
Yes, I wanted to just say that there was the Summit of the Future, the first one ever, held at the United Nations at the end of September. And there were a lot of talks, and there have been lots of talks about, of course, AI and big data and all the data collecting. And since that's one of the most massive workload is to, it's the UN, watching the world, knowing what's to observe and how to gather the data between governments, civil society, and research institutions. So I'm working with the UN currently, and I see this as an opportunity for them to get together around this data for good society, but that requires them first to be able to work together, which is not a given.
No, and it's a huge challenge because, companies are very, very reticent to share data because it's just, there's myriad reasons. And I think, Kevin, you pointed out that one of them is actually quite banal, which is just that some of the data is just garbage, hasn't been kept up. No one's cleaning the data. It's just been sort of living in like some server somewhere in a data lake somewhere, and no one's really known like what to do with it. And and then there's also this kind of trap of the data-driven solutions, right? And data-driven decision making, because you can give 10 people the same data set and they will make 10 different inferences from it, because we're all.
Well, but this is why the UN would be a sovereign entity for that type of thing, like that could. No, Kevin is against. Okay, but I know they're thinking, they're discussing this because the gathering data is what they do already. Just what do they, and that's based on data today that they take decisions as well of what and where, what intervention, how, where, all this is based on data. So it's just the next iteration and the next level of data gathering and managing.
Leticia, I had a few years ago, it was before the pandemic, it was maybe 2016, something like this, during an event with Google and with Microsoft. We had exactly this discussion, how to convince people about this data sovereignty, data ownership. And we sketched out, or more or less, I've done the work, they've just been listening, sketched out 3 different models. And so between the ultra capitalistic model, where you as the one who produces data would have your own, not private bankier, but a data trader that will be in charge to manage your data and to get the maximum of profit out of it. So from this ultra capitalistic towards even to sketch out that it needs to be an international entity, best would be United Nations, someone who is connected to everyone and simply defines these different level of data, that the people have access to this data, that they can review data, and that also through this entity is being defined how to deal with this data. The thing is just UN turned into something that is extremely challenging currently. So the same way that we see in the European Union, that we see right now, for example, in development of AI, where you have more or less the US approach, the European approach, and the Chinese approach, we do not speak the same language currently.
So I'm actually here on behalf of UN, and that was them calling, Jay. So let's stop slamming the UN.
Swisscom, Deutsche Telekom. No. It's just not the same set of data. It's a given set of data that, well, perhaps I misexpressed myself, but we were on for good, data for good, right? And the ultimate institution that has been collecting data over the past 70 years is the UN. So today, and it is ground up. It is not so, but it depends on which set of data. It's not everybody's data. It's not private data. It may be flood data. It might be fire data. It might be chickenpox data, but it's a different type of data. We're not speaking about the private sphere. We are, but at a different level, where the data is already without identity.
It's also affecting you, because into this flooding data, into the fire data and so on, come as well insurance data, insurance informations. So all of these things are as well, yeah, of course, you need to know how much it costs when it burned down, right? What kind of massive...
No, but we're not, no. I'm not at all in the economic. I'm not at all on the same level. I am not. I am just saying it's data for global good that we can dig into and develop. It has nothing to do with the private sector. Well, it does because it's involved, but not.
I was just going to ask Jennifer and Kevin, just because we're getting to the end of our time here. This is all, but I'll let you both speak just shortly. But I think it just goes to show how important this topic is to this broader XR industry. With this discussion that's coming up here, there's so much to say and there's so much applicable data. Which, if we had this recording go on for 2 weeks, I don't think we'd have enough time to really get into the depths of it and the importance of it. But Kevin, I'd love your 2 cents, and Jennifer, I'd love yours too. But I'd also love to hear from your perspective and from your knowledge why all this deep conversation, what it all means more deeply for XR before we wrap up. Kevin, please give us your 2 cents, and Jennifer, it'd be great for you to wrap us up.
I think for XR to go to the masses, we need use cases that people don't understand the technology, they don't care, but it brings usefulness and functionality to them. How that will play out is there'll be different hardware, different use cases, different software. There'll be different data used. I don't see anybody being able to come up with the magic stack of what data goes where, who can do what. I think the best example I've seen, say, for data for the greater good would be sharing methane emissions worldwide, making it public. Nobody can hide. It's not company data, it's publicly available satellite data. So those kind of things, but it depends on the data, it depends on the industry. Geopolitics comes in, and people go, oh, well, it might be for the greater good, but we're not doing it because we don't like you, and blah, blah, blah. I think that's all going to play out. That's going to play out for decades, centuries, millennia. I don't think we have to fix the data issues in the world to get XR to the masses. It's two different things. They're highly related, but if I want to share data in my business around XR for training, for asset management, whatever, very different discussion to health data and public and companies like Facebook or others mining my personal data for their benefit. All valid, but I think we're trying to boil the ocean a bit too much.
Fantastic, Jennifer. We're great to hear your perspective as well. And again, just how that all links and wraps back around to XR before we wrap up for the day. I really appreciate everyone's comments. You know, that's such an expert insight and such an impassionate conversation, really. It's all so important for what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think, you know, when I reflect upon this whole conversation and all of the different aspects that we've spoken about, the word that kind of keeps coming back to me over and over again is trust, right? I think it's trust that whatever experience that end users are in brings value to their lives. I think there's that aspect of trust. I think there's the aspect of trust around the different parts of the ecosystem working together. There are aspects of trust around what data is captured and in what format. But at the end of the day, once again, if we can all kind of come together and determine what this, you know, what some of the standards are behind all of this and the ways in which we can work together, we can establish that trust. And when I look to XR and where we go in the future, as we start to make some of those decisions and agree on the path forward, those standards do bring about trust and the ways in which we can really capitalize on what immersive brings to the space. So I'm hopeful in the end. I think we're getting there. It just comes down to having the right discussions like we've had today.
And thank you for being the voice of reason. Not that you're not, Kevin. You are also very reasonable. I think the rest of us who shall remain nameless, me, Jay, and Leticia. Oh, sorry. We're going down a rabbit hole, but we all care about this so much that I think that's why we took a hard left turn.
And those are different discussions. You're right. It's not really linked to how to bring XR to the masses because we know it's too much of a divide. Yeah.
No. And there's going to be a whole other issue around data with these devices. So we'll talk about that on another show that Rory doesn't include in the actual topics.
No, it's all relevant. It's all so passionate. So I thank you. I appreciate all of your time today. I appreciate all of your insight equally. It's all so valuable. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Leticia, Jay, Kevin, Jennifer. Thank you all for joining me today. And hopefully I'll see you again for next month for another very, very passionate conversation about data, XR, and everything in between. Thank you so much for joining me today.